Welcome to NTD News. Kevin Hogan here. Welcome to NTD News. Kevin Hogan here. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Senate Republicans criticizing President Biden's massive spending bill after Congress passes it without GOP support. How will the administration pay for the stimulus? Arizona lawmakers are calling on the Biden administration to take urgent action at the border. They say releasing illegal immigrants without virus testing or quarantine endangers Americans. Another controversy at the Capitol. National Guard ordered to stay there despite doubt about whether they're really needed. Top Republicans say it's time to move on. The Senate has big plans for infrastructure in the U.S. The Democrat chairman of the committee says it's one of Biden's top priorities. Will Republicans support it? Andrew Cuomo faces new allegations of sexual misconduct. He calls the report gut-wrenching, but denies he did anything wrong. Breaking news, in a 227 to 203 vote, the House just passed new gun control legislation. This act expands background checks for people who want to buy or transfer firearms. Now, private sales, including online sales, must go through a background check first. The bill makes it illegal for anyone who isn't a licensed firearm dealer, importer, or manufacturer to sell or trade guns with people. 8 Republicans voted for the act, and 1 Democrat voted against it. Representative Mike Thompson, who sponsored the bill, said it's a critical step towards preventing gun violence and saving lives. Republican Representative Elise Stefanik called the act unconstitutional and said she'd defend the Second Amendment. Senate Republicans are criticizing the passage of President Biden's stimulus bill. Now they say the country will pay the price. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell dislikes the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill that just passed Congress Wednesday.
I think this is actually one of the worst pieces of legislation I've seen pass here in the time I've been in the Senate.
Democrats have praised the bill, but Republicans say it's excessive and wasteful. Only 1% of the bill is for vaccines, and only 9% is for health care.
But it was a liberal wish list. They've described it as the most progressive domestic legislation in a generation. It certainly lived up to that billing to go one-party rule and load it up with a lot of their wish list agenda. And I think that's an unfortunate outcome for the American people. And
the Senate passed the bill over unanimous Republican opposition last weekend.
I think one thing the Biden administration really has to focus on is the risk of what all this debt's going to do to us. We're sitting at $28 trillion worth of debt. This will increase our debt by at least $2 trillion.
The White House says Biden plans on signing the bill Friday and hitting the road in the near future to convince Americans this was a good idea. The Biden administration has signaled it could introduce gradual tax increases to help pay for the stimulus. That includes raising the federal corporate tax rate to 28%, up from 21%. Progressives criticized former President Trump's previous tax cuts, saying they mostly benefited the rich. But some economists believe the cuts created prosperity and opportunity for all Americans. Now, the conservative-leaning Tax Foundation says Biden's tax proposal would raise the U.S. federal-state combined tax rate to over 32%. That would make it the highest among G7 nations. Senior policy analyst Garrett Watson told the Epoch Times, "This is the last thing we want to do as the U.S. recovers from the pandemic." The Tax Foundation says Biden's tax hike would reduce long-run economic output, eliminate about 160,000 jobs, and reduce wages. Reactions are flowing in over the latest $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. New Yorkers share their thoughts on what was done right and what they say could be improved.
People outside New York's Penn Station shared mixed feelings about the latest stimulus action. Some say they're happy about the next direct payment headed their way, this time worth $1,400.
I think it's a good idea in the big sense. The financial aspect, of course, a mother of 3 with a 16, 15, and 17-month-old.
Others say the one-time check isn't enough.
I think we should get a monthly payment, which will help out the economy a lot better, because people still out here without jobs and unemployment.
Still others questioned if the stimulus was necessary or whether it could have been crafted differently.
Bills did not work for us because we cannot prove that we have employees. There was nothing in the bills, that, help us sort of like getting bridge loans to revive our businesses, or innovate, to continue being in business.
The House approved the bill Wednesday over solid Republican opposition. The Senate passed the measure 4 days ago over unanimous GOP pushback. The 628-page measure represents Democrats' effort to revive the economy. Republicans say the measure is crammed with liberal policies unrelated to pandemic relief. Biden tweeted that he'll sign the bill on Friday.
A group of Arizona lawmakers are calling on the Biden administration to take urgent action against what they're calling the escalating border crisis. They say after over a year of devastating lockdowns, the president's immigration policies risk undoing Americans' hard work and sacrifices. NTD's Grace Coulter has the story.
State Representative Mark Fincham says the people of Arizona are outraged at what he calls the selective application of public health policy. He's referring to illegal immigrants crossing the border and being released into the U.S. without being tested for the virus or being required to quarantine.
If you think that this is a good policy, then all of the work that we have done on public health care over the last 14 months, you might as well put it in the shredder, because everything that we've worked for is now being compromised.
He and 3 other state reps are urging Arizona Governor Doug Ducey to follow in the Texas governor's footsteps and deploy the National Guard to combat the escalating border surge crisis, and for the 14-day quarantine protocol to be enforced for those entering the country. They're also calling out the Biden administration for its immigration policies.
All of this is absurdity, because we now have a president who is sitting in the White House and who has essentially opened the borders to people who come across, get on a bus, and are sent into the interior of the country. They're not all staying in Arizona, but they are crossing our border.
Earlier this month, several illegal immigrants that had crossed the border and been released into the U.S. told a Spanish language network that they had just tested positive for the virus at a local testing site in Texas and that they were heading straight onto a bus and to other parts of the country. Some said they were heading for North Carolina, Maryland, and New Jersey. Representative Fincham says this is especially devastating for those who have lost their businesses and livelihoods during the pandemic, as well as putting those who are most vulnerable at risk.
If communities of color are at highest risk for this, why is it that the president is allowing busloads of people who are likely to go into communities of color without being quarantined, without being vaccinated, without even being tested? What's up with that?
In the Arizona border town of San Luis, nonprofits dedicated to helping asylum seekers are running out of resources and shelters. Farmers Without Borders told ABC5 they're calling on churches and community centers for more help, but many are closed due to the pandemic. And they aren't the only ones calling for help. The Department of Homeland Security is calling on volunteers from within its agencies to assist with the border. On Monday, activating the Volunteer Task Force to help with what the DHS Secretary is calling the overwhelming surge at the border. Grace Coulter, NTD News, New York.
Several dozen missing minors have been located, recovered, or rescued after a month-long operation in Texas. At least 7 of the children had ties to sex trafficking. The other 24 were recovered from friends or relatives and reunited with their legal guardians. The U.S. Marshals Service and Homeland Security Investigations headed the operation, and police departments in Arlington, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Grand Prairie assisted. Arlington's police chief says these children are some of the most vulnerable and that adults preyed on their innocence. In 2020, the National Crime Information Center recorded over 346,000 missing children reports. About the same amount were also purged from the system because law enforcement found the child or they returned home on their own. A court case that challenged a major immigration rule is in the reject pile of the Supreme Court. The judges dismissed it after the Biden administration asked them to drop it. The case challenged a Trump-era rule that required prospective immigrants to support themselves financially. People who were likely to rely on the government for aid would be less eligible for a green card. In February, Biden issued an executive order mandating a review of the rule. The Biden Justice Department told the court that all parties are asking to dismiss the case. That means the White House is likely to overturn the rule. Supporters of the of the policy say self-sufficient people should enter our country, a core principle of the American dream. And opponents say the rule discourages immigrants from accessing basic necessities. The National Guard are staying in Washington for 2 more months. Top Republicans say the troops aren't needed anymore to protect the Capitol.
Senator Mitch McConnell says the extra security measures are unnecessary.
I just checked early this morning. There have been no serious threats against the Capitol.
He says we're, quote, way overreacting. And Senator James Inhofe calls the troop presence outrageous. Republicans say no one will tell them why the troops need to be there. D.C.'s mayor, a Democrat, says she thought the troops were about to go home. She doesn't know why they're staying. John Kirby, a spokesman for the Pentagon, says the Capitol Police are asking for help. He says they need the support but didn't specify why.
They have a need. They have a legitimate need for some capacity assistance in a time which is fairly uncertain right now. I'm not going to speak to specific threat.
McConnell compares the way the Capitol looks to a war zone.
With all this razor wire around the complex, it reminds me of my last visit to Kabul.
And says the scene creates a bad image for America.
It looks terrible to have the beacon of our democracy surrounded by razor wire and National Guard troops.
Kirby agrees that people don't like seeing the military at the Capitol, but says they can't make security decisions based on how things look. Troop levels are being reduced by about half. 2,300 members will stay at the Capitol until mid-May. Kirby says they will decide then if the troops are still needed.
A group of Michigan Congress members served food Wednesday in Washington to National Guardsmen from their state.
It's about saying thank you. We have a quarter of the troops that are here that most people don't realize that, and these men and women have been here since January, and they've been keeping us safe, and we're very grateful to them. We don't take it for granted.
Debbie Dingell, a Michigan Democrat, says their gesture of feeding the troops was a show of support. It comes on the heels of complaints from Michigan troops about the quality of food provided to them during their mission guarding the Capitol. They said the food was undercooked, raw, and moldy. Some even reported metal shavings in their meal and ended up in the hospital. Michigan Republican Bill Huizenga said he plans to introduce a bill to help. It would provide service members with a stipend to purchase their own food while on duty. The Senate is working on a major infrastructure bill. The price tag will start out at $320 billion, but some Republicans worry their voices could be steamrolled in the process.
To be led by men and women.
Senator Tom Caper is the chairman of the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee. On Wednesday, he told reporters on Capitol Hill there's a broad agreement to get to work on transportation infrastructure in the U.S. He said, "That's a Democratic priority. It's a Republican priority. It's a priority of our new president." Caper asked all of the other senators to find out what their states need in terms of infrastructure and then report back by March 9th.
The bill as amended is passed.
The initiative comes right after Democrats passed their nearly $2 trillion stimulus package without any Republican support. Democrats ignored or brushed off many of the Republicans' amendments to the package, making some worry they could do the same with an infrastructure bill. Senator Shelley Moore Capito is a ranking member on Caper's committee. She weighed in, telling reporters, "I am concerned about it because there's a lot of chatter about just basically denigrating our ideas and saying we're just going to go big." But Senator Lindsey Graham seems more hopeful. He said if there's any issue that can gain bipartisan support, it's infrastructure. Graham told reporters this is really the best chance to do something together, maybe the only chance. Everybody needs roads and bridges and ports.
Mr. Bennett.
Democrats used a budget process called reconciliation to cut Republicans out of their relief package. If they do that again for this infrastructure bill, they could face resistance from Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. That's because he doesn't support using reconciliation for that matter. Democrats would need at least one Republican senator to cross the aisle if Manchin tries to block the bill. Lawmakers hope to have President Biden sign the bill by the end of September.
A sixth woman has come forward accusing New York Governor Andrew Cuomo of inappropriate contact. Lawmakers and protesters are calling him to resign or be impeached.
The woman claims Cuomo groped her aggressively and reached under her blouse. Cuomo denies touching anyone inappropriately. The woman's name has not been released, but media reports say she's on Cuomo's staff and that the alleged incident occurred at the governor's mansion last year. Reports describe the woman as much younger than the governor. Cuomo spoke at a press conference earlier this week. He said no one ever told him that he made them feel uncomfortable. Pressure is escalating for Cuomo to step down. Fox News says at least 85 New York lawmakers have called on him to resign or be impeached, some even from his own party.
New York needs new leadership!
Protesters gathered outside Cuomo's Manhattan office Wednesday. They blocked traffic and chanted for him to quit. One of the organizers said the women are brave for speaking up.
These women have the courage to speak up, not just for themselves, but for vulnerable people. And this man refused to step down.
One protester says Cuomo is corrupt and hypocritical.
He's the epitome of corruption.
Cuomo is also under investigation for his role in nursing home deaths from the pandemic, but repeatedly says he will not step down.
The Biden administration will have the first top-level in-person meeting with China next week. State Secretary Antony Blinken plans to discuss Beijing's threat to the U.S. He also named steps to stop China's ongoing genocide. NTD's Lin Lin brings us more.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken will meet Chinese officials next Thursday in Alaska. This is the first high-level in-person meeting between the U.S. and China under the Biden administration. Blinken intends to raise issues of concern to the U.S., and he claims this is not a strategic dialogue.
This is an important opportunity for us to lay out in very frank terms the many concerns that we have with Beijing's actions and behavior that are challenging the security, the prosperity, and the values of the United States and our partners and allies.
Besides concerns that the U.S. has with China, Blinken said they will also talk about competition to make sure U.S. companies and workers benefit from a level playing field. He will also explore whether there are avenues for cooperation. Blinken has said that he stands by the Trump administration's description of China, that they do indeed commit genocide. On Wednesday's congressional hearing, he named a number of steps to combat this.
Going forward, to include for those directly responsible for acts of genocide, gross human rights violations, sanctions, visa restrictions, etc.
In last week's speech, Blinken described China as the only country with the power to seriously challenge the stable and open international system. House Foreign Affairs Committee Republican leader Michael McCall re-emphasized this view. He said the Chinese Communist Party can't be treated as a normal adversary.
We also know the CCP wants to re-engineer the world. Xi promotes his Marxist ideology as a better way than democracy.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will join Blinken's meeting with China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi and State Councilor Wang Yi. The meeting will follow Blinken's first overseas trip to Japan and South Korea. Reporting by Lin Lin, NTD News.
And coming up, New Yorkers are enjoying the first week of warmer weather. They're going to Central Park to move around, meet friends, or just soak up the sun. And California faces mudslides after a winter storm brought heavy rainfall. It brought property destruction and blocked roads. Stay tuned to find out more. A divided court on Wednesday ruled against pro-life protesters. They tried to discourage women from entering an abortion clinic in the New York City borough, Queens. The court said the laws that stop the pro-life protesters don't violate their free speech rights. The 2-to-1 majority said without blocking the Saturday morning protests at the abortion provider, Choices Women's Medical Center, New York faces irreversible damage. That's because the protests, which began in 2012, could start again. One judge who disagreed with the ruling accuses the majority of interpreting the laws in order to suppress the protesters' First Amendment rights. A lawyer for the protesters expects them to challenge the decision. And if you live in New York City, you had better be careful. A murder suspect has been wrongfully released from a New York City prison. He was still awaiting trial. NTD's Arian Pastar has the story.
The 26-year-old murder suspect, Christopher Bucks, is moving about. He's armed and dangerous. Officials are on a manhunt for him. Authorities released him from prison by accident on Monday, and not just any New York City jail, but Rikers Island. Boggs was there awaiting trial for a murder that took place in 2018. Now he was also serving 30 days in prison for an unrelated case, and he was released over those unrelated charges. Correction officers are warned not to approach him because he's armed and dangerous. If you see this man, please call the police. New York City's mayor says the city is investigating how this all happened. He says the city is going to put additional safeguards in place to make sure this never happens again. A joint fugitive task force consisting of NYPD officers and the US Marshals are out looking for Boggs. All NYPD patrol officers have been given a photo of the suspect and are told that he may be armed. Aaron Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Pressure is mounting to reverse $16 billion in emergency power pricing. The chairman of the Public Utility Commission of Texas met with utility analysts at Bank of America to discuss the issue. The state's power grid operator raised electricity prices during the February cold snap blackout, but the prices surged to about 450 times their usual level long after the emergency passed. The meeting came 2 days before the Utility Commission chairman was set to rule on the issue and decide whether to drop billions of dollars in charges. Reversing the charges would help retail marketers, but hurt traders and power generators that would otherwise get the money. Bank of America has market analysis and power and gas trading arms tied to the Texas crisis. Seattle has taken an economic hit after a year of lockdowns, protests, and restricted police. NTD reporter Emerald Chung spoke to one business owner who fled the Emerald City for greener pastures.
Seattle was once known as the city of neon lights. Downtown was filled with booming business. However, today Seattle has empty office buildings, boards covering shop windows, and sparse law enforcement. John McDermott, co-owner of Car Tender, an auto repair shop, told NTD why he left Seattle's Capitol Hill district after 21 years of business.
Seattle City Council is not doing their job, and we're paying taxes for no reason.
Over 160 businesses have either closed down or moved out of Seattle since last year, according to local news station KING. While some businesses left for lockdown reasons, many, like McDermott, left because of violent protests and their aftermath.
We would have absolutely stayed there had the whole Chaz Chop thing not happened, because that's where our customer base was. We really didn't have a whole lot of choice, but to move the business if we wanted to remain in business.
Crime has soared with Antifa and BLM protests. At the same time, the city leadership has worked to defund local police. McDermott felt this firsthand after his business was the target of both robbery and arson.
And every time we called 911, you would talk to them and they alluded that they were coming, but they weren't. And they weren't going to come. We don't have the police protection. We don't have fire protection. The police department doesn't show up when they're called. They're only doing, it's untenable.
McDermott added that, though one repeat offending robber was caught, he was released quickly after. This was a result of Seattle's catch and release policy. NTD reached out to the Seattle City Council for comment, but we did not get a response. However, McDermott puts the responsibility squarely on their shoulders.
It's a sad day when people that are hired to protect the citizens of the city don't follow through with what their duties are.
Local government has yet to address the rising crime and fleeing businesses. Reporting by Emerald Chung, NTD News, Washington.
New Yorkers are being greeted with early spring weather, and locals say they're looking forward to more warm weather. NTD's Arian Pastar has the story from Central Park.
It's the first week of warmer weather here in New York City this year. And where do many New Yorkers like to go when the sun is out? You already know, Central Park. So we asked the people here how they feel about this beautiful day.
I mean, it's everything, like just sitting in the sun with my best friend.
That's just like New York City tradition. As soon as it gets warm, everyone just floods the park, so.
It's just the best place to get the most sun in the city, and it just feels good.
Yeah, just get out as much as you can, take advantage of the sun.
Well, anything else you would like to add about the nice weather in the city, about the summer?
Summer can come fast enough, and we hope that things will open up more. We hope that there's going to be like nice little festivals.
Yeah, just I guess getting outside more instead of being cooped up inside, and hopefully traveling a little bit.
I mean, just being outside again. I've been at home almost every day, so just being outside more, it's going to be great, yeah.
Really looking forward to the warm weather. It's been a tough winter, and that's really it. Just excited to get out.
So as I just learned, on the first warm day of the year, New Yorkers like to go to Central Park. But I'm sure it's not the last Central Park day of the year. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Residents in California's Canyon area are evacuating because of a massive mudslide. A powerful winter storm is bringing heavy rainfall into Southern California. No injuries are reported so far. NTD's John Frederick has the latest.
We're on site in Majeska Canyon, California, where mandatory evacuations have been placed. Behind me are leftover remnants from December's bonfire, which decimated over 13,000 acres of wildlands. This is today's belligerent behind the mudslides. Resident Susan Awamoto sent us footage of a mud flow near her home just hours ago, not far from our location. Overnight rain saturated the hillside with powerful mud flows and in many cases resulted in the destruction of property. According to the National Weather Service, more than 1.5 inches of rain fell over roughly a 3-hour period in the area. There weren't any immediate reports of heavy damage, but some vehicles were in fact trapped. Videos from the Orange County Public Works shows a bulldozer was used to clean the aftermath. Authorities said it will take at least a couple hours to make these roads accessible again. With more rain expected in the hours ahead, Orange County officials have already begun to make mandatory evacuations as well as preparations for possible destruction. There have been no reported injuries at this time. This is John Fredericks, NTD News, California.
Daylight savings time is almost upon us, which means changing the time on our clocks. It's also rekindling a discussion about whether we should have daylight savings time all year round. NTD's Don Tran has the details.
It's almost that time of year again to move our clocks 1 hour forward to start daylight savings time. It's basically to give us more time to be awake when the sun is out. Of course, we'll have to change the time again when fall comes around, but many people across the country want daylight savings time to be permanent. State lawmakers in Georgia recently passed a bill to make Georgia run on daylight savings time all year round. Other states in the Southeast and the Midwest also passed similar legislation. Why do some people want year-long daylight savings time? The problem of having to change the time twice a year. Sleep specialist Dr. Michael Gelb says it disrupts the sleep cycle.
An hour less sleep at night for the 1 to 2 to 3 days where you're at 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, when your body is getting used to that, those are the times where you're going to get the most accidents at work, traffic accidents, heart issues, health issues related to disruption in the sleep cycle.
We asked some people what they think about the proposal. One person says it shouldn't be made permanent.
I think it's just a waste of time. Okay. Just leave everything the way it is.
Another person says it should be permanent, but it should be standard time, not daylight savings time.
It's the nature of how the sun is and moves, and I think the daylight savings time just makes more complications.
Some sources say daylight savings time is associated with more cancer, diabetes, and obesity. Dr. Gelb says regardless of what time schedule it is, there should be a balance.
It's going to be different. There's a lot more daylight time in the summer, as I said, than in the winter. So we really want to compromise. So whether it's standard time or daylight savings time, I think the argument would be just to pick one and stay with it. Whatever that is, what's ever better for kids, what's ever better for health, I would say would be the way to go.
Since 2018, 9 states have passed bills to make daylight savings permanent, but they'll have to be approved by Congress before they're put into law. Don Tran, NTD News.
And just ahead, the Chinese regime summons the UK ambassador over an article she posted on Chinese social media speaking out for media freedom. And China takes facial recognition to another level. A Chinese company's artificial intelligence can now identify faces even when they're covered by masks. That and more coming up on NTD News.
someone has to find the way to build the Great Dome. Completely new, completely original.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled, and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
"90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The mission of the Epoch Times is to chase the truth, to ground all statements in facts, and prevent people from being misled. This is a battle between truth and deceit. Subscribe today and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board."
A mother in China is speaking out for her son. Her 21-year-old son is believed to be tortured by Chinese police. His alleged crime? Sharing information about Xi Jinping's daughter. NTD's Hong Ning has more.
21-year-old Niu Tengyu is a self-taught coder in China. At the end of 2020, Chinese authorities sentenced him to 14 years in prison for what they call picking quarrels and stirring up trouble and violating others' privacy. Niu received the harshest punishment among the 24 people arrested with him. All 24 of them were involved in the leaking of Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping's daughter's personal information. They had administrative access to a wiki-based forum. They did not leak the information directly, but only shared links to some foreign websites. These websites show the ID number and ID photo of Xi's daughter. This happened in 2019. Police detained Niu in August 2019. Niu's mother says Niu refused to plead guilty, so police tortured him to get a confession.
He was hung up and splashed with cold water when he collapsed from the beating. Then they went on beating him. He was not allowed to eat or sleep, and he was injected with saline. Worse still, a policeman surnamed Chen stripped my son naked, insulted him personally, and used some obscene language on him.
In a handwritten note recently made public, Niu said police forced him to confess to crimes he did not commit. For this, they made him write his alleged crimes on several hundred sheets of paper. When he failed to finish writing within the required time frame, he was beaten, deprived of sleep. He wrote that within 40 days in December 2019 and January 2020, he slept no more than 30 hours combined. Niu's lawyers told his mother after visiting Niu that the officers used a lighter to burn his private parts, and a police officer also recorded the torture sessions and created a folder for them in order to insult Niu. They did all this to force a confession from him.
The lawyer told me he saw cigarette burns on my son's arm, and they injected some unknown substances into his feet that caused pus. My son told the lawyer not to tell me. He did not want me to be scared. This is what the first lawyer told me.
Niu's mother had to change lawyers 6 times to defend her son. The first 5 dropped the case after authorities threatened to revoke their licenses. Niu's mother also received death threats for speaking out for her son. Niu's mother also says she is suffering from worsening eyesight and heart issues. This is because she is anxious about her son. Despite the challenges, she says she will stay strong and tell the world what the Chinese police have done to her son. She says, "May heaven help me so that I can live to the day when I can see my son again." Hong Ning, NTD News.
Military tensions are ramping up between China and Taiwan, and a top U.S. admiral warns about a potential invasion. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more on the story.
Now let's turn to Taiwan and a warning about the island's long-term safety. A top U.S. military officer says China could invade Taiwan in the coming years. That's as Beijing works to build a military as powerful as the United States by 2050.
Taiwan is clearly one of their ambitions before then, and I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, in the next 6 years.
His concerns come as Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping works to bolster his military. Speaking in front of top military officials on Tuesday, Xi warned of instability and uncertainty in China's national security. He also urged troops to improve combat readiness. Although Xi didn't mention Taiwan in his speech, the Chinese regime has been upping tensions in the Taiwan Strait. Chinese military jets have been spotted soaring through Taiwan's air defense zone in recent months. Top Chinese diplomats have also advised the Biden administration against crossing what it has deemed red lines, including the Taiwan issue. Taiwan has never officially declared independence from mainland China, but it's become a de facto independent nation-state, with its own democratic government and military. The Chinese regime still claims Taiwan is part of its territory and has been threatening to bring the island back under Beijing's control by force if needed. The U.S. does not have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but under U.S. law, Washington must sell arms to Taiwan to help it defend against attacks. Washington never made clear whether it would defend Taiwan if China did invade, but the island remains crucial to America's national security. That's because Taiwan sits on a critical line of defense for the U.S. It's part of a chain of islands ranging from Japan all the way to Malaysia. The chain makes it hard for Beijing to launch submarine-based nuclear missiles toward the U.S. But a break in that chain could leave the U.S. vulnerable. China's Mask On facial recognition project just took home the gold in a global tech competition. Nearly 200 companies from around the world participated. The contest was sponsored by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, an agency under the U.S. Commerce Department. Shanghai-based tech company X4 AI scored Best in Show for its milestone in facial recognition. The company's new Mask On system can identify faces even when covered by masks, no matter the material or color. The company has kept a focus on AI development for the past decade. The company also plans to release the world's biggest facial database and a series of benchmarks based on that data. Facial recognition is widely used in China's Xinjiang region as a method for identifying and suppressing the Uyghur ethnic minority.
A new episode in the tensions between China and the UK. Beijing summoned UK's ambassador to China on Tuesday. This comes after she posted an article defending media freedom.
Caroline Wilson posted an article last week on WeChat, a Chinese social media platform. She explained why foreign media's criticism of the Chinese regime did not mean the journalists responsible hate China. But the Chinese regime said her article was inappropriate. It said it only opposes those journalists who make up so-called fake news. In response, Wilson wrote on Twitter, "I stand by my article." No doubt the outgoing Chinese ambassador to the UK stands by the 170-plus pieces he was free to place in mainstream British media. Last month, Beijing banned BBC World News following reports alleging abuses in Xinjiang province. This came after UK's media regulator Ofcom barred Chinese state broadcaster CGTN. Ofcom said the channel was controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, which goes against UK regulations.
The governor of Taiwan's central bank says the United States may label the island a currency manipulator. That's because it has already met Washington's criteria for that designation. Taiwan's central bank governor Yang Qinlong said the label would not bring any immediate harm to Taiwan, adding that he doesn't expect any tariffs. Yang said it's important to inform the United States about the reasons for Taiwan's strong currency. That includes the U.S. quantitative easing policy and the effects of the U.S.-China trade war. The Taiwan dollar's 5.6% gain against the U.S. dollar last year was among the strongest in Asia. On Wednesday, Taiwan's central bank announced a large spike in its currency intervention spending last year. That's what possibly put the island in Washington's crosshairs. Still to come, relatives of victims in the Boeing 737 MAX crashes should soon see financial compensation after the DOJ reportedly appointed 2 experts to distribute the funds. And real estate marketplace Zillow is facing an antitrust lawsuit. A brokerage firm claims it's burying certain property listings and blocking customers from spending less on fees. Find out more after the break. We have an update on the 2 737 MAX crashes that killed over 300 people in the last 3 years. The DOJ is expected to name the experts who are going to oversee victim compensation.
The U.S. Justice Department will name victim compensation experts Ken Feinberg and Camille Biros to oversee a $500 million victim compensation fund tied to the 2 deadly crashes of the Boeing 737 MAX. Sources familiar with the matter told Reuters exclusively on Wednesday. An official announcement could come just in time for the 2-year anniversary of the deadly Ethiopian Airlines crash of a Boeing 737 MAX that prompted a worldwide grounding of the plane. Feinberg is no stranger to the task. He ran the high-profile victim compensation funds for the September 11th attacks and the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Relatives of the 346 people killed in the 2 737 MAX crashes, the Ethiopian crash in March 2019 and the Lion Air disaster 5 months before that, are eligible for compensation. The $500 million to be doled out comes from a January settlement between Boeing and the DOJ. The 737 MAX, Boeing's best-selling jet, is flying again in some parts of the world after the disgraced playmaker assured airlines and regulators in many countries that it fixed a software glitch linked to the 2 disasters. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration is keeping a watchful eye on the MAX, tracking all flights of the plane via satellite data. Relatives of crash victims, however, are angry the plane has been allowed to return to service after its 20-month grounding in the U.S.
Prices at the pump are rising, and they could go even higher by summertime. We hear from some experts on what's causing the hit to American wallets. NTD's Arlene Richards reports.
The average gas price has soared to over $2.80. This after OPEC agreed to maintain production cuts last week for most countries. Former Shell President John Hofmeister says OPEC's announcement is a factor behind the rising prices.
So the consequence of OPEC not increasing production at a time when world demand is going up, at a time when U.S. demand is going up, creates a psychology of scarcity, and that leads to gasoline price increases.
Hofmeister believes OPEC wants to harm America, taking into account President Biden's dislike of fossil fuels and climate change priorities.
What they're doing in reaction is saying, you don't like gas and oil? Fine. We're not going to produce it. Watch your American consumers lose money from their pocketbook.
Another reason is low supply amidst surging demand. Companies are focusing on their shareholders because they haven't been getting enough cash.
Or have been spending too much capital for too long, and so they're withholding the new money going into more oil production.
Oil investors say Biden's policies will also raise prices.
And they're not allowing us to drill in New Mexico on federal lands, which is one of the Permian Basin. The Permian Basin produces 40% of the oil in the United States, over 40%. If we're cutting that off, we're going to cut our supply off.
Some predict oil prices will soar even higher. Shell's former president suggests Americans will be paying $3 per gallon by summer. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
If you're looking to pick up some cheese on your next grocery run, you might want to avoid Costco for now. The big box chain is running out of certain varieties. They're facing difficulty stocking imported cheese because of a global shortage of shipping containers, plus bottlenecks at key ports on the West Coast. This has caused shipping delays for suppliers and delays for retailers receiving the goods. The situation is also raising higher supply chain costs. And it's not just cheese that's impacted. The problem is also affecting seafood, olive oil, furniture, sporting goods, and lawn and garden equipment. Apple's setting up a new chip design center in Munich, Germany. It says it'll be Europe's largest R&D site for mobile wireless chips and software. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Apple's building a major new chip lab in Munich, Germany. It's part of a $1.2 billion investment in the country over the next 3 years. The new facility will be home to Apple's growing cellular unit. The company says it will be Europe's largest research and development site for mobile wireless chips and software. Munich is already Apple's largest engineering hub in Europe with 1,500 engineers. They helped design the first chip specifically for Mac, the M1. It improved performance and efficiency across Apple products. And during that time, the company says it spent nearly $18 billion with more than 700 German companies. Currently, there's a worldwide shortage of chips, which has affected the automobile industry, among others. The German government has recently been pushing other countries to provide it with more chips for its car industry. But Apple says the new lab will focus on 5G and future wireless technology. It's set to open later next year. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Brokerage firm Real Estate Exchange, or REX, is filing a federal antitrust lawsuit. It's targeting real estate website Zillow and its subsidiary, Trulia, plus the National Association of Realtors. REX says its clients complained their property listings were being buried and were more difficult to find in search results on the real estate websites. It claims Zillow and the NAR are trying to stop them from bringing lower fees to customers. REX is not a member of the NAR or a multiple listing service, known as MLSs. REX says an update to the Zillow's and Trulia websites in January caused the problem, explaining that listings from agents that are MLS members now appear under a default tab labeled Agent Listings, and those that don't belong to an MLS are downgraded to a separate tab labeled Other Listings that needs to be clicked on in order to be viewed. A spokesperson for Zillow says the company believes the claims have no merit and intends to defend itself. An NAR spokesperson says the lawsuit has no legal basis. Walking out of a store while wearing a mask and not paying at the register. Some say shopping at Amazon's first physical store in the UK makes you feel like a thief. NTD's Jane Worrell went to Amazon Fresh in West London to find out more.
It's very cool inside, but you do feel like a shoplifter.
Amazon's first store outside of the US is here in London. After scanning in with your phone and taking your items from the shelves, you just walk out, but you're still charged through your Amazon account. The online retail giant says it works out who takes what through computer vision, sensor fusion, and deep learning. More excitement than concern outside the newly opened store. The queue goes on and on.
It's convenient to walk out, but not so convenient to walk in.
We've come here 3 times to get in and we still can't get in, so we are waiting for it to calm down and get in.
It doesn't look any different to any kind of self-checkout store that I've noticed.
It still has a novelty factor though.
I think even if it's just to come in just to look around or to try maybe to trick the cameras or something, I think it's just fun for one day to come and just try it out. So. Who knows? How do you trick the camera? Well, sometimes I'd hug my dad and then put the stuff back to see if the cameras wouldn't see us.
Less people is working, more people is buying, but yeah, it seems we need to try it and see how it will go.
This is cutting edge, it's new technology, and I think it'd be sort of really interesting to sort of try it out and see how it works. I've no doubt that supermarkets will be following in those footsteps.
Amazon says it uses in-store technology to link to your Amazon account, keeping that data linked for 30 days, and it doesn't use facial recognition. Some campaigners have raised privacy concerns, but that's not the only concern.
I feel like it's a bit of an Amazon takeover, and now they're sort of encroaching into kind of supermarket retail. Personally, I'm not a fan. I'm interested in the technology, but I'm not really interested in seeing more sort of Amazon shops. I want to see more variety.
Amazon plans to open more stores in London throughout the year. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
Looking for a vacation? You could own your very own slice of Caribbean paradise. Little Ragged Island in the Bahamas, also known as St. Andrews, is for sale. The 730-acre island boasts freshwater ponds, snorkeling, and sailing opportunities, and even has its own flamingos. Your nearest neighbor would be a 10-minute boat ride away. The island is on sale through Concierge Auctions, a U.S. real estate company that auctions properties to the highest bidder. To join the auction, you need a $100,000 deposit. The island is listed for $19.5 million, but there is no minimum bid. Bidding opens March 26th and closes March 31st. A number of island brokers have reported a huge spike in demand for private islands since the pandemic started. Up next, a disconnected telephone box in a remote Japanese village helps people connect with the loved ones they lost in the Fukushima disaster. Find out more when we return. With a moment of silence and prayers, Japan mourned about 20,000 victims of the massive earthquake and tsunami that struck 10 years ago, destroying towns and triggering nuclear meltdowns in Fukushima. Huge waves triggered by the quake crashed into the northeastern coast. At 9.0 magnitude, it's one of the strongest quakes on record. It crippled a power plant. Radiation spewed into the air, forcing more than 160,000 residents to flee. On Thursday, at the exact time the earthquake struck a decade before, Japan's emperor and his wife led a moment of silence in Tokyo, while people across the country joined in silent prayer. At the commemorative ceremony, officials wore masks and kept a distance. They did not sing along with the national anthem to try to prevent the spread of the virus. A phone booth in a Japanese village provides solace for grieving families. Those missing loved ones who died in the 2011 Fukushima disaster can send them a message.
A white telephone box in a remote village of Japan has become an unlikely source of comfort for those grieving loved ones. Survivors of the 2011 Fukushima disaster say the unconnected phone line helps them keep in touch with those they have lost. Kazuyoshi Sasaki visits the booth in the town of Otsuchi to speak to his late wife. She was one of nearly 20,000 people in northeastern Japan who were killed by the earthquake and tsunami that struck on March 11, 2011. Dialing her now defunct cell, he breaks down in tears as he explains to her how he searched for her for days after the disaster. He goes on to update her on things that have happened in his life. He's moved out of temporary housing, their son is building him a house, and he's lost a bit of weight. For Sasaki, the phone booth is a source of solace.
This phone booth embraces all of me. It embraces various people like those affected by the disaster. It's a place that embraces not only the people who are alive, but also those who've passed away. That's how I feel.
Sachiko Okawa uses the phone to call her late husband, who she was married to for 44 years. She asks him what he's been doing since he was swept away all those years ago in the tsunami. She often brings along her 2 grandsons so they can also talk to their grandfather. The phone now attracts thousands of visitors from all over Japan. It is not only used by tsunami survivors, but also by people who have lost relatives to sickness and suicide. Known as the wind phone, it was built by Itaru Sasaki, who created it after he lost his own cousin to cancer a year before the Fukushima disaster.
Just miles away from the Fukushima nuclear station, a Japanese rancher raises more than 200 cattle exposed to radiation. He hopes the memory of the disaster lives on as a symbol of anti-nuclear protest.
The cows raised in Japan's Ranch of Hope can never be sold. They live just miles away from what was once the Fukushima nuclear station, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. In its wake, Japan's government ordered a widespread cull of livestock exposed to radiation. But for the past decade, rancher Masami Yoshizawa defied that order and kept his cows alive.
I've been exposed to radiation, but I chose to stay here. By keeping these cattle, I'm hoping for a world without nuclear power plants.
Hundreds of thousands of people were forced to leave their homes a decade ago following the disaster. Many cows starved to death as a result. But Yoshizawa stayed and took in animals left behind. Now he guards more than 200 cattle as protest against the government and Tokyo Electric Power, or TEPCO, which owned the Fukushima nuclear plant.
I hope that more people see these cattle stay alive for a long time, as a memorial of the disaster and as a symbol of anti-nuclear power.
Yoshizawa says it costs about $74,000 a year to feed them. That mostly comes from donations. He even drives a bulldozer every day to pick up rotting vegetables from supermarkets and food waste from factories to feed his cows at a lower cost. While he's received compensation for the disaster, he is also critical of what TEPCO has contributed to local residents. And every month, he takes his protest straight to the utility company's doors. Yoshizawa says he's probably the only rancher taking care of the affected cattle, but he also says he isn't slowing down anytime soon.
And that's all for now. Catch us again tonight at 6:30 Eastern. I'm Kevin Hogan. Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.